What does it represent, the flower?
Red clover is one from childhood. So we have pieces that are in red clover. The dandelion is the same, but for me, that transmission and a big part of what it is it's healthy boundaries. So it's like if you want to have healthy boundaries within yourself, like she will be supportive of you. And there's a lot with it because it's a late bloomer. So it also has that messaging of like, don't worry, like you have time. Everything happens in its own timing. Like, don't compare yourself. Everything blooms in its own time. Goldenrod is one I work with a lot. I think we need to hear that more. And it can signal change. So she can show up at times where you're about to go through some change, or collectively we're about to go through some big change. So I'm using her in some pieces for 2025 because I think we can all feel that we're going through a pretty big transition as a society.
This is the Space Whispering Podcast with Rainy. I had the honor of speaking with Kami, and she heals through adorning the temple, your temple. Isn't it precious to see the body as a temple, as holy, holder of our hearts, our soul, our mind, our spirit? She works with natural dyes and fibers. It's handcrafted in New York, does custom channeled dresses. Her presence is ancient. I felt like, well, how to describe how I felt. I lived for many years in a small beach town called Las Terrenas, specifically Playa Bonita. I used to have a quad, a four-wheeler. I just loved it, the wind, the power, the vibrancy of it. It's like I felt protected and wild. And I felt like I needed to go through this dirt road. At one point, I was going to turn right, and I felt like I needed to turn left. And when I turned left in the mud, and I felt like, oh, like something's calling me home. And I kept driving, and suddenly there was this tree. It's called Ceiba. La Ceiba. Gigantic, enormous. I mean, I've been to the redwoods in California, and this just felt so majestic, like the holder of the island or something, like just the protector. And it turns out this tree has more than 1,000 years alive. I cried. I just cried in her presence. And that is how Kami's presence felt. It felt like vines are in her head. The earth is surrounding her, protecting her. And her presence has that protection, that embrace. And her presence felt like adornment for the body, for the soul, for the spirit. And I am very grateful for her. Let me know how you feel. Subscribe, like, comment. The full episodes are in Spotify and YouTube. The clips are in all social media platforms. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, Kami. How are you?
How are you?
I'm excited you're here today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for joining me. You're a brave one. So I like to start with your name, how to pronounce it, and where it comes from, and how you grew up with your name.
My name's Cami, and it has origins in Japan, but I don't think my mom knew that. I think she heard it somewhere and really liked it. I think at this time there's more people with this name, but at the time I was growing up, nobody had this name, so that I knew. And so that's always a mix when you're a kid, you know, having a name that's different, and sometimes the teachers can't pronounce it and those things. But as I've gotten older, I'm very grateful to have a unique name, and I feel like it suits me. So yeah.
Do you know like the meaning behind it?
Yeah, it's, you know, there's the translations of it. So I'm, you know, hesitant to speak about how it's this inhabiting spirit of everything in nature, essentially, that everything in nature has a spirit in it. And yeah.
And does it make sense to you? Like,
yes.
Yeah. Do you feel like you embodied that when you were growing up, like naturally?
I think so. Yeah, I grew up in nature and had a deep connection to that. I think probably in some ways more than to people, um, and spent most of my childhood outside and yeah, so whenever I could. Um, so it seems appropriate.
Super appropriate, yeah. It's interesting because what I understand, like it has, a culture that you not might be directly connected with, but it's like it's your name,
Mhm.
and you came into this earth with your name, so it's
Right.
like what you feel, if it
Yeah.
feels right, then it is. So
Yeah.
growing up with a difficult name, I totally understand that because my family always called me like my name is longer than that, so it's Reynelina. So my family always called me Rainy in Spanish, which is Rainy. So every time a teacher would stop when they're like, it's my first day in class, and they would just like pause, and I immediately like would raise my hand because I knew it was
Yes.
me. Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that moment. Yeah, say it again in Spanish. That's so beautiful.
So in Spanish is Rainy, or my full name is Melina.
So beautiful.
It took me a while to accept it.
Hmm.
Um, when I was growing up, I think more like in maybe when not when I was like young, but more when I had like more consciousness, like third grade, second grade, third grade, or maybe not consciousness, that I was more aware that how my name affected other people.
Hmm.
It was more of that than, because my family was used to it, so it never really affected me. So I would like to know, like, what do you do? And I know that's a broad question, but just like maybe just start with like the basics of what you do today for work.
Well, I create clothing. I work one on one with customers, creating channeled custom pieces. And then I have an online shop, and do pop ups from time to time as well that are the more ready to wear, I guess, is how you would describe it. But everything has the theme of the energy of plants running through it. So the custom work is naturally dyed with plants and extracts and things from nature. That's a more labor intensive process. So that's a really specialized piece. And most of those are, for special occasion or they're for ceremony or, and the other pieces are not necessarily naturally dyed, but they have prints of plants that I work with, and I draw most of the prints that we create. And we work with a certain plant over a period of time. So we might have a few pieces. I'm working with dahlia a lot right now. So there'll be like, I think we have the dahlia altar cloth up right now. And then later there's going to be a kimono out of it. And yeah, so the plants and nature are informing it. And we're supported by that, that process of wearing clothing that supports us in the ceremony of our lives. And so that's the basis of it.
It's beautiful how you say the ceremony of our lives. Can you like talk a little bit more?
Yeah. I guess, as we move through our day, every day we're putting on clothes, and it's a pretty new idea that our clothing wouldn't be thought of as something that was supporting us. It's, the altar of our body, what we put on it is very, very important. And um, in the modern culture we're in, there's sometimes not as much thought to that, what intention went into the clothing, as well as, um, yeah, all of the energy that informs it. So what kind of materials it's made from. And yeah, when we put something on, we're really taking on everything that went into it being made. So all of the intentions and what that company might stand for and what types of fabrics they're using and how their workers are treated and all of these things we're then placing on ourselves. And so there's a way to support ourselves moving through our daily lives, and the ceremony is a ceremony. Our lives are made up of our days, our hours. And I think when we can wear things that remind us of our intention for ourselves and how we want to move through the world in any way that we can be reminded of it, our morning ritual or our prayer life or the clothing we wear, but any way that we can be anchored into what our intention for our life is powerful. And I think clothing is one of the most simple ways because we're getting dressed every day. Yeah.
Well, that brings to mind many things. I have many questions, but the most pressing one is like, um, maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't, but Steve Jobs used to just wear like specific clothes every day or the same clothes every day.
Mm.
Or just repeat it just because like in the morning our brains consume a lot of energy, and so whatever you do or the intention you put behind it, you spend a lot of time, and then in a way you waste precious like moments of creation, of connecting with yourself, but basically creation. So like in the morning is a time where we're more creative.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
So, so is it, do you have an opinion on that of like repeating the same clothes or like not being over, like wasting time, I guess, deciding on what clothes to wear? Just curious.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I think simple is definitely better in terms of what is more supportive for sure. Um, I think as far as probably consumerism in general, like less is more, it's better if we have pieces that maybe we pay a little more for, but we know the intention behind them. We feel good about the company that they're from, how the fabrics feel on our body. And maybe that means that we pay a little more, we have less in our closets. But I think overall, that probably does simplify our process in the morning of getting dressed. And we know what color we're reaching for that day or how we want to feel, and probably have a more intimate connection to each piece if we have less. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so that brings me into like what is your morning routine with clothes specifically? Do you have one?
I do. It depends on what I'm doing. So I have
Okay.
days that are fairly labor intensive because I'm doing custom work that involves plants. So, I have a linen apron I really love that I'm wearing most days that I'm doing that. That has a lot of meaning for me, but for the most part, that would be the thing that I'm wearing the most. And then obviously what I'm wearing under it has to be something that I can get splashes of dye on and all of that. So that's kind of, the painting outfit kind of thing. And then, for meeting with people and events, and I have certain colors and fabrics, I'm pretty picky about natural fabrics work better for me, and I can really feel the frequency of the fabrics. So I'm very particular about natural. So that's probably the core thing, is that I like to wear natural fibers.
So then, where do you source these? I don't know if that's the right question, but like, how do you know? Like, what is the research behind that you do that you make sure that it comes from quality and natural fibers?
Well, when I'm working for my work, especially the more specialty work, the natural dyes won't adhere to a fabric that's unnatural. So a man-made synthetic fiber doesn't take the natural dyes. So from that very basic place, the plants will tell you if it's not a natural fiber. If you thought it was and tried to dye with the color won't take. So in terms of my work, I'm always using natural fibers because that's what the plants respond to. As far as my own wardrobe that aren't the items I've made, I look for companies using organic fabrics as much as possible, and also I'm not particular, it doesn't have to be that, but it's a felt quality, and I think the most important thing for me is just that it's cotton, silk, wool, or linen.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, what are the natural fabrics? So you answered that. And then I'm thinking, because you talked about it's almost like a ritual. Like you're gonna go to work, you wear your apron, and whatever underneath is like almost your canvas, your second canvas,
Yeah.
right? Because of the
Yeah.
splashes and all of that.
Yeah.
And so you could probably like see it and be like, oh, I really like this pattern
Yeah.
once you take it off.
Yep.
Yeah. And what is your creative process, for example, for creating a piece for someone else? Like how does the process start from like start?
Usually I meet with somebody. Sometimes it's just through email exchange, or they've seen a lot of my work is word of mouth. So often somebody has seen something on another person and reaches out through email and is like, I think I need a dress in that color. That was really speaking to me, or with this floral pattern, or with this spirit animal, or whatever it is. And then sometimes it's a one-on-one meeting, and there's a certain energy they want to call in, or something that they're hoping to feel. And I get a lot in the dream space. So usually 24 hours before I meet with somebody, or 48 hours before, I'll start dreaming into what plants or what colors. And that's always been how a lot of my creative work comes through. So I just have carried that into the one-on-one process.
How did this whole thing happen?
I've always sewn and designed and made clothes since I was very small. My grandma taught me to sew when I was 5, and she lived next door to me. So I was a really voracious learner. I basically lived at her house. This is what I wanted to do. I've always known that. I've been like that since I was very little. So I worked in the traditional fashion industry for a long time, and also did a lot of like custom bridal work. So that's how, on the side. So that was how I really developed a lot of my process with one-on-one clients. And then I had a period of time where I was working for a traditional, like just in the fashion industry, and I had a studio at home, and I had started working with plant extracts with some private clients in like the wellness and spiritual community. And I was just kind of doing that quietly on the side. And I had pieces for my traditional job, and I had, these other pieces I was creating from plants all in my studio. And I actually started seeing the auras around the clothes. And so that was really, and I also dream about the plants. I have plants come through. So I think really the nature and the plants got really loud with me and said, we need to go this way. And it was disruptive, for my life at the time, because it was a big change, but it was really fulfilling to go in that direction. So that's the direction I went in, because I wanted to be bringing through pieces that were supportive of people, and I could physically see that they were more supportive. And then I was wearing them, and I could feel that they had a lot of energy around them.
How was like the emotional process doing that? Like realizing that you can see energy around?
I mean, I think probably that has been there for me, and it got louder when I was working with the plants. But I've had that, the dreaming and the deep intuitive process was informing my work for other companies as well, because I think it's just so close to my heart. It's what I was doing since I was so small, and it was just my creative life is so fulfilling, and just a deep part of my life. And so, speaking of the ceremony of your daily life, I think it had its, the more you do your morning meditation, right, the more you can kind of like slip into that zone, and you've got that flow. And I think that was always there for creating clothes. That was like my love, so
Yeah, the same. I can relate, and that's why I asked like if it was a huge shift, because I remember being more spiritual, and when I say spiritual, it's like connected to nature and like super creative. And then when I started like growing up, that kind of started fading. And also school, and then we moved to an apartment. Like we used to live in a house surrounded by nature. And then we moved to an apartment to be closer to the city. Like slowly that disconnection started happening. But as well, it's like being around certain people. And at one point it was like I remember having like nature in front of me, and then my clients on the phone. And I was like, this is my dream. I thought this was my dream, like the phone call. I thought that was my dream. But I'm seeing nature and I feel so called to it. And so it took me a long process to get to where I am today. But it seems like for you, it was like an evolution. Like you always kept it close. And I wondering, like in a traditional fashion industry, like didn't it affect you? Like you mentioned the word consumerism, or like sometimes it can be like show offy or all about the exterior,
Mm-hmm.
but you're going like beyond that. So
Well, I was in New York City for 20 years, so I relate to being removed from nature. I was very lucky that all of my apartments, for the most part, were across from really big parks. And so I was in nature, but nothing like now. I'm in a house now and it's just a totally different experience. I'm hiking in the woods every day. I'm back to where I was as a kid. It's really wonderful. I think, yeah, I can relate to what you're saying in that I had some big milestones in my fashion career that as I was experiencing them, I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Like, you're having like the big moment you worked towards or something like that. And the felt sense of it is quite terrible. And it's not actually at all like what you imagined it would be like. And it's not fulfilling in any way on any level of what you were hoping for. And those are lessons too, but not always the most pleasant ones, but give you like a direction of really where to go. And I think for me at this point, it's hard to choose anything that doesn't give me the felt sense of what I'm looking for. I put a lot of love into what I do, and I want to have an exchange of a lot of love with like the moments I'm having. Anything big that's going to happen has to have a lot of love in it. It can't be a big, flashy, as you said, like more showy thing that's sort of absent from the felt sense. I don't really want to be in spaces or having experiences that aren't really rooted in this idea of love and connection, because it can't give you the thing you're looking for. You go in thinking, oh, it's going to give me this whatever. It's usually ego. It's going to give me accolades, or it's going to give me some big thing that I wanted. Yeah, so I had a lot of those lessons, and usually was able to feel right while I was in them, oh, I worked very hard for this moment to happen, and now it's not at all what I actually want. And so, yeah.
it's crazy how we need to experience it, or we even want to experience those extremes, because then that confirms like our true decision or true path,
Mm-hmm.
the path for us in the moment, because it's always shifting, it's always changing. But those moments are pivotal, like they're so important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I know some people don't need to experience it, but I think more people do need
Yeah.
to see the differences. I think it's probably like the human experience. Like that's why we're here, to experience all these extremes in a way.
Yes.
So you also mentioned a lot about this is basically the first time in human history where like clothing is like almost like not a ritual.
Yeah, it's kind of well, I think we spend a lot of money on it, but I think it's a bit of an afterthought in a lot of ways in terms of the actual felt sense of it or the energy of it. But just pre industrialization, like the amount of time that it took to create a textile and to make it at any point would have been so labor intensive that you would have worn that piece again and again and again and again. And you also most likely, even in our very recent history, I mean, my grandmother made a lot of my clothes, and I could obviously very much feel that there was love in them. And so that's, without realizing it until later, really did inform a lot about what I was creating, how I was making my choices, but also that's what I grew up doing. So, I made clothes for everybody around me. Like that's what I did. Like that's how I shared. And clothing would have been made really by our grandmothers, our mothers, other people that we would have known, the people most likely. And again, because it was labor intensive, we would have worn things over and over. We would have had a connection to it. This is the piece I wear when I'm doing this, even if it's just your apron for work, right? But like, this is the piece that I wear when I'm doing this. This is what I wear when I'm doing this. And very unlikely would you have just thrown something out after a few wears. Like, that would have been absurd for the amount of time that it takes to make things. And so I think that I think we're at a point where that's really important, and there is quite a bit of focus on waste from clothing, and we need to be rethinking that relationship.
Yeah, it's I think it goes like very, very deep into like the psyche of humans because I realize that some people like, oh, shopping is my therapy, for example, or like, you go into a big department store and they have a sale. And so you're like, oh, I need to get it now. So it activates, even if you don't realize it, you sometimes are in it and you're like blinded and you want, or TV, social media, all these things that are like combining different cultures as well. It's like, or different fashions or different seasons, even if you don't live in a country that has many seasons. And so it's kind of like hard to not fall into the purchase more and more and more or have. Do you do you encounter that with your clients like that?
I think the people that have been drawn to my work tend to have thought about a lot of that at this point, and are people who are maybe, certainly my private clients, I think are very sensitive, sometimes physically, to wearing fibers that don't feel good to them, that aren't natural. So already they're looking for these alternatives. And I think as far as how much we're purchasing and why we're purchasing it, like, because as you said, it's on sale, or, we feel like even in that, if there's a bit of unconsciousness or we're swayed and activated by marketing, I think the end result will be those will be the pieces we wear the least. And most likely they'll be the pieces that we get rid of first. And so I think just by paying attention to that, like, what do you reach for the most? You're most likely to reach for the thing that, whether it's the color, there's something about how it makes you feel if you're wearing it a lot. There's something about that that's speaking to you. And we want more of those pieces and less of the pieces that we maybe were persuaded to buy because of marketing, but they don't really speak to us. We don't find ourselves reaching for them over and over.
That is a great marker. I want to like remember this and have it in my brain because it's so interesting. So I have a story. My mom, I was reading a few years ago, I was reading the book. It's from a Japanese lady. She even has a Netflix. I've never seen it, but I was attracted to her book. And she's the one that says, like, if it doesn't bring you joy, Marie Kondo.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember reading this book to my mom. We were under willow trees, like I had some willow trees in my backyard, and I was reading this book to my mom and my sister. And my mom stops me and she's like, you used to do this when you were young. And I used to criticize you. Like I couldn't understand why you would do this. I'm like, what do I used to do? Totally blank. She's like, you used to take all your clothes out like a few times a year, like maybe twice a year. You put them on the floor and then you would divide it and be like, okay, I'm going to donate these and I'm going to stay with these. And so like from a young age, I already was like thinking like, oh, I don't like clutter or I'm not really using this. And so I would give it away and to people that I love, like, and I still do that. And I was like, thank you, mom, for reminding me this because this is important for me because this book is important for me. And I remember we used to shop like once a year. So on summers, we would go visit like my aunt or my grandmother. And then my dad would be like, okay, this is a time for you to go shopping. And my sisters would go and shop so much. And I'm like, in 2 days, I'll be done because I was more interested in like pens or notebooks and stuff that I can write or sketch. And then my clothing, I would buy basically the same thing. So like I would have like the basics. And then if I needed it, I would get more. But if I didn't need it, I wouldn't. So because it would last, like I remember clothing lasting a lot more.
Mhm.
A lot more.
If you're looking for sustainable practices, not a lot of times things that are marketed as sustainable fabrics are not natural fibers, and that's not always the best feeling thing. Or I tend to think that those don't last as long. But if you're looking for sort of that sustainable experience, that vintage clothes are made so beautifully. So I have dresses from the 30s and 40s, 50s, and some of them are, I mean, it's incredible. Like you couldn't get that except in a couturier space today. What the way they're made, the wide hems, the detailing, the way the zippers placed, everything. It's so beautiful. Things did last, I think, quite a bit longer. And also vintage is really good. There are some people that have really good shops and stuff for that. And yeah, it's a good alternative.
Yeah. And I was telling my sister-in-law that she used to take me like shopping in summer. It was always summer. And the clothes I would buy with her, it was like 20 years later, I still had it. I'm not lying. Like I would wear the same. I remember there was a brown skirt and like a yellow shirt, like it was more formal. And I had it for 20 years. And I told her the only reason I gave it away was because it wouldn't fit me anymore, and I just had it there. But like that clothes, and she's like, yeah, because I used to take you to discounted like designers, like higher up like store. And I'm like, really? She's like, yes. Because I wasn't paying attention to all of this,
Right. Right. And also, it sounds like the experience with her was so positive. So then that association also is in the clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I relate a lot like the closing of moments. Like even if I like store a clothes and like I have it, or I left it at my mom's, or I left it somewhere at a friend's house, and then like years later I see it again, I'm like all the memories like flood in, and I'm like, oh, this is so precious, or this texture, this color. That's so nice that you say about vintage. You mentioned vintage because there's so many vintage stores now in New York, like compared to before.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, a lot of people are preferring that than
Hmm.
going to a big store.
Yeah.
I get overwhelmed with big stores, but
Understand.
some people don't. Yeah,
Mhm.
some people love it. So it's kind of hard. It's about, I think a lot of it, maybe it's like education, like, you know, stay away from that. Like, yes, this is marketing. Remember, come back to
Mhm.
the roots. I was also thinking about, because when you mentioned, like, I want to go back to culture, because I'm thinking, like, other cultures, like, their clothing is so specific in the sense of, and like, for events or activities and stuff like that. And I think this still happens, like for weddings, specifically in the Western world as well. Specific clothing for weddings or special events. Is there any particular culture that you're attracted to regarding like clothing and rituals?
I think that what I work with a lot is a lot of embroidery, which I think is across cultures. So a lot of cultures were using different forms of thread work and embroidery to bring in symbols and to bring in meaning and to reflect nature. So the flowers, the symbols. I think that's across cultures using threads, sort of painting with the thread, essentially. So that's probably the biggest thing.
Can you talk more about that? Because I'm curious about embroidery. So you're saying that people used to embroider things on clothing, like symbols?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, even if you are embroidering, I just did something the other day with the plant marigold. So even if you're just embroidering the marigold plant onto a piece of fabric, you're really bringing in like it's like working with a plant essence. You're bringing in the essence of the plant. And so that's across indigenous cultures. Most people were reflecting nature back in what they were wearing. And yeah.
I'm guessing they were also like omens or prayers. Is that part of it too?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different cloths that were used that had the specific symbols, the things for ceremony, and certainly the people who were holding ceremony and wearing those clothes, but also just in a more day-to-day way, not necessarily with like formal ceremony. But weddings are that's a good base place, because most cultures like had clothing that the bride wore and that the groom wore, and that's still true, and that the people who were attending or holding the ceremony wore. So, yeah, and the altar cloths, things like that, almost always had a lot of meaning in how the stitching was done.
Is there any like religious background that you are attracted to in your work?
I am really so devoted to nature. I really learn so much from nature and feel so connected. So I think there's a really earth-based experience for me in that. So no particular formal religion, but a lot of spirituality that is, I have a very prayerful life, and feel very connected to the idea of praying for others and praying for the earth and that connection, but not through necessarily a formal religious background.
And my question was about like more of the fabrics, like, or the symbolism. Yeah, it was more towards that because when I close my eyes, that's what I picture, like rituals, and that's how that's my information, like religion, like Catholicism, but I'm thinking also Judaism and like all these, you know, cultures or backgrounds or religious backgrounds that use a lot of symbolism in their clothing that are clear, at least to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, is
Yeah.
there
And
any?
so with my custom work, a lot of times people have a particular symbol that has meaning to them that's come through. And like probably my most common thing that I do that's naturally dyed, that's for a wider group of people, are my naturally dyed wraps. And there's an option on those to add a custom symbol when you purchase. And so that's, many people have a symbol they come in with, and they say, they send me it through an email. This is the symbol I'm working with that I feel is protective of me. And again, sometimes it's plants, sometimes it's a holly branch, or it's a particular, a lot of times like a bird, a particular thing that that person is working with and that they feel protected by and want that symbol. And we put it on the inside so it has that privacy. It's wrapped around them, but it's on the inside, not necessarily shared with everybody.
That is so beautiful. I didn't know this. This is new for me, by the way, the symbolism. Yeah. That's why I bring religion back, or other cultures, because I'm like, I never knew that. But it makes sense, like sewing in a prayer, a symbol, or something you relate to it. So it's very intimate. It's very intimate. It's a beautiful work. How do you, because it's very niche what you do, at least from my point of view. And how do you have this trust that, you know, you're always going to be okay with your business? And even when you made that decision to go completely natural and doing your work and using specific fabrics, like, how did you, to this day, how have you worked that process to trust?
I'm feeling like maybe that was part of it for me, was, having the faith and being able to watch for the signs and the symbols and um, the different synchronicities that happened. And I was very taken care of in the process. So I met the right people that I needed at different points. And I think if there's something that wants to come through us, that tends to be, we're supported. If we're looking, we can see that we're very supported along the way. And I didn't leave my more traditional job until I was having enough of this experience to understand that it was really the direction that I needed to go in. And it required courage to take a leap. But I had already been doing this work for my whole life on some level. Um, and then it had its own momentum. It was drawing people in, and that's kind of how I think about it. I think I'm sort of caring for the work, but it has its own sort of inhabiting spirit. I think it's coming through. It has a way that it wants to be in the world. It's not necessarily mine to dictate. I have to listen to it, and so I think I was very supported. To answer your question, I think I was just very, very led and supported. And as long as I was listening to what was the right next thing, and a lot of it happened through word of mouth. So I understood that it's very niche, but it was resonating with people in a strong way, in a way that was strong enough for me to know that it could be a business and something that I could move in the direction of.
I'm so happy you listened and you followed that path, because it's so precious. It's like your name coming through. The meaning of your name, it's coming through in everything in your life, even your work. That is precious. Because we forget. We forget why we're here and enjoying these moments. And you mentioned the word so much, fulfillment, that you feel fulfilled in your work.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of people can say that. It takes courage. Even like the way you speak, like I feel ritual. I feel like I am surrounded by warmth and by nature, but also like work, because I see that, like it's work, it's like beautiful work. And so what are your like daily routines as personal and then in your business that keeps you like running?
Well, I meditate every morning, so that's been a big part of my life for a really long time, and I don't skip that. So that's it's just when I connect, and it's before I look at my phone, and it's before I take on anything else, and have coffee or tea and meditate and sit with my cat. I'm a big animal person, so we have dogs and yeah. And that's really important to me. That's a big, big part of my life, is the connection to animals. I think they're often a lot easier than people. They bring that energy of just unconditional love. We're so blessed to have them. It's incredible, and it's an anchor. So I think like living with animals, and it's just an anchor for me of unspoken connection, um, and it's not mental and it's not verbal. It's just you really feel their love and their energy. So that's a big part of, I think, my personal life. I hike every day with my dog in the woods. Used to have 2 dogs. So when we moved out of the city, we started hiking all the time, and that was really big. And then in my work, I think the minute that I step into my studio, I'm sort of in that ceremony. So it's a big dreaming space for me, that creative flow, and that I think creativity is its own ceremony. So I think anytime we're doing something that's creative, even if we're cooking a meal, it has its own momentum, it has its own needs, it has its own, I don't know that we dictate that, but I'm open to it. I step into it and I let it inform me. And I often will think the day is going to be very different than it is. I think I'm going to work on, I often have many things going at the same time, because I have the ready to wear pieces and that part of my work. And then I have the private client part of my work. And then sometimes I'm just creating future collections. So I will sometimes step into the studio, think I'm going to work on one particular thing, and something else takes my attention and needs to be dealt with that day. And it has its own voice for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, because sometimes I'm like hard on myself if I do that. Like I'm like, okay, I have this day, like I'm gonna work on this and this, and then suddenly I'm just so attracted to doing this thing. And I start questioning afterwards, like, was it procrastination? Was it this? Was it that? So my mind takes over.
Mhm.
How do you work with that? Yeah.
I'm pretty good about giving myself space around completion times. So I'll work really far out from the completion time so that I have flexibility in it. I don't get right up to the edge of when something needs to be sent or when something needs to be worn, so that I can have the spaciousness to be like, yeah, I'm going to do this other thing. This seems like it's calling to me today. So it requires some organization for sure, because if you have the completion date, you need to get it done and you can't get distracted or get pulled in a different way. But if I organize and give myself that space, then there's more room to flow.
Yeah. Because sometimes even if I do that, I'm still hard. But I'm like, okay, it's okay. It's need to be compassion, but also just like you said, it has its voice. It's calling. Just listen. You mentioned the liva, the
Oh,
plant,
Dahlia. Yeah.
dahlia. Yeah. What does it represent? I can't picture it right now. The flower.
Well, it has a lot going on with it. I had an experience with it where I went to unexpectedly, I went to a garden in late August, public gardens, and they had many, I think 6 or 7, just huge gardens, just dahlias. So it was like a transmission. I walked in and I was like, what is this flower? Like I had maybe seen it on its own or with other, but I hadn't seen it like just gardens of dahlias. So it was really impactful, and I've sort of been working with it ever since. And it happened after sort of a difficult encounter. So I came from a sort of difficult energy, and then I was like around the dahlias, and it was very powerful. So I took a lot of photos and I kind of worked with it for a while over, I mean, it's been a couple years now, which I like to do. I like to work with something for a long time. Red clover is one from childhood. I've worked with that my whole life. So we have pieces that are in red clover. The dandelion is the same. I like to work with it for a while before I'm sharing it, because I think then I have that connection. But for me, and on that day, that transmission, and a big part of what it is it's healthy boundaries. So it's like, if you want to have healthy boundaries within yourself, like she's a good one, like she will be supportive of you. And um, there's a lot with it because it's a late bloomer. So it also has that messaging of like, don't worry, like you have time. Everything happens in its own timing. Like, don't compare yourself, because that plant is still going, like often in September, sometimes even the beginning of October. And so many of the other flowers that showed up in April or May, they're not they're not blooming anymore. Don't worry. Everything blooms in its own time. Like I love the late bloomers for that. Goldenrod is one I work with a lot. I think we need to hear that more. I think there's some people talking about that right now, but we hear a lot about people who made it in their 20s or people who made it in their 30s. And it's like, everybody has their own timing. You don't need to compare. You don't need to be worried about that. So I'm, that's a big one with that plant for me. And it can signal change. So she can show up at times where you're about to go through some change, or collectively we're about to go through some big change. So I'm using her in some pieces for 2025 because I think we can all feel that we're going through a pretty big transition as a society. And it's really wonderful to work with plants that are supportive around these themes and these things that are coming up for us, because they really want to be in relationship with us. That's how it was for, thousands and thousands of years. Like we had a relationship with the earth. Like this is natural to us.
The earth will give us the medicine we need even before we knew we needed.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's simple, like citrus in winter.
Yeah.
It's like very simple, very easy.
Yeah. Citrus is it's always so good, but it's different in January, right? Like it's different in December when you're preparing for the holidays. Like you really go like, oh, I needed this.
The earth is so precious, and we've forgotten the natural ways of things that for us now it's like woo, but it's not. It's like, no, this is what's natural. We just have forgotten. So reminding ourselves of that. Everything you were saying about the flower, I'm like tearing up because it's like it's so precious, right? And it's like the impact of when she showed up in your life,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like she was waiting for you to
Yeah.
see her.
Yeah. I think it's one of the ways that we can receive. It's one of the ways that we can have this call and response with the universe is through nature, through the earth. We are loved. We are precious. So they show up. They show up at the right time. And the more we have that healthy relationship with ourselves, the more that we're going to see it mirrored back to us through the natural world, because I think it's what wants to happen. It wants to be in communication with us,
Mm-hmm. One last question. So when you say you work with the plants, what does it mean? Like you bring it home, you plant it, or do you use a dye, or do you find the meaning? Like what is like some of the things you do?
It's a mixture. So a lot of my custom pieces will be made from, I have some that I work with that are made from, the color is coming from simmering pine cones from a white pine. And so the dress is literally white pine dyed. And even when you press it, like if it hasn't been washed a lot, it smells like pine when you're ironing it. So that's one way. I work with extracts that I purchase. So some stuff I'm not growing, it's not indigenous to here. So I'm purchasing that from a company, and I'm working with, a formula for, using an extract and making a dye bath and putting the fabric in and stirring the pot and creating it. And then there's also some that I grow. We can grow marigold here. So, I have like the flower garden for certain pieces. Hollyhock grows pretty well here. Kind of depends on how your spring and summer, what the rain is like. Sometimes I have great ideas about what I'm going to do with my flower beds, and then that doesn't take that year or not enough to do the dye bath. And then sometimes I buy flowers from other growers who are doing something similar and grow the flowers themselves. That's a good way to do it. So
It's a very lengthy process. So you really are working with the plants and experimenting with it. Wow. So beautiful to have the image of what you do, the behind the scenes. Yeah, that's so cool. Anything else you want to share today with us about your work, about you?
I think we covered a lot. I feel good about what we
Lovely.
covered.
It's so precious. Your work has opened a new window and new hope for me, and it has opened my heart today. So I'm very, very grateful.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it was so nice to speak with you. You have such a beautiful spirit. It was so nice to take an hour and sit.
Yeah, so precious. So grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely.
Mm.
Space Whispers. Thank you for spending time with me today. Your host, Rainy, on the Space Whispering podcast. I hope today's episode gave you something to reflect on, inspire you, or energize you to create something beautiful. Help us grow this soulful community and spread the love by subscribing to the podcast, leaving a review, or sharing this episode with your community. If you're feeling called to transform your inner or outer spaces into a true reflection of you, let's connect. Schedule a discovery session with me at rainy.co or Instagram rainy_. What soulful actions will you take today? Keep listening to the whispers of creation and let your soul's magic flow into the world. See you soon. Besitos.